Good afternoon, everybody. So the purpose of this panel is to talk about personal experiences and how they drive folks. I'm the only temporarily able-bodied person here on this panel, and I am very happy to have that honor. And I'm right now writing a book about students with disabilities here at Harvard. Some of you are going to be in it, are already in it. It's almost done. And one of the things that, with all the policies that we talk about as it relates to inclusive education and the progress that's being made in many places on opening educational opportunity up to students with disabilities, one of the things that struck me when I started to teach here at Harvard was happily having lots of students with disabilities in my classrooms who are obviously examples of successful access to education, or they wouldn't be here. But one of the things, so I decided to do a book on case studies of students here. Title of the book will be "How Did You Get Here?" Meaning, how do you get to Harvard when you have a disability? There's so many obstacles that are put in the way of many people with disabilities. And I've been so impressed with the personal stories because ultimately what we want these policies to result in is good educational experiences for individuals. So that's what this panel is about. And can we start with you, Nick? Okay, good. Why don't we start with you? Okay, I got two microphones here. What am I doing with two microphones? That's greedy, isn't it? Is that what it is? I need more, right? They're all tangled up together. Here we go. Here we go.
I'm going to stand up. I have to stand up when I speak because otherwise I don't feel comfortable. I don't think it is. Is it now? Okay. Very good. All right, so again, good afternoon. This has been the part of the day that I've really been looking most forward to because it's the personal experiences of especially the guests that we have here are just absolutely fascinating. To come from very diverse backgrounds and to get where we are, it's, as Professor Hare said, the stories are just fascinating. Something that I've been very much interested in for the last several years. So my story begins when I was in first grade. Our teacher brought into class a book of Braille and showed it to the class. And that day, I remember my mom picked me up in the car, and as we were driving home, I slouched down far in my seat, I closed my eyes, and I watched the sun and the purple after images it made on the back of my eyelids. And I thought, how terrible would it be if I couldn't see my mom's face or my classmates or my school, the green, the tree outside? That'd be tragic. I don't think I'd be able to live if that ever happened. 6 months later, a brain tumor crushed my optic nerves and left me blind. It's one of those things where, to this day, I just avoid thinking about things that could possibly happen because you never know. You never know. Losing my sight was terrifying for obvious reasons. But I think scariest of all was the prospect of beginning the third grade in the fall at a school where I would be with other kids like me. And it was this like me that was truly frightening. What had I become? You know, just a short year ago, I was a normal kid. I went to the suburban school. I, played with my friends. I played on the playground equipment outside. I had a typical life. There was no surprises in store. But now something had fundamentally changed about me. Now I was placed in a category apart. And I didn't know what to expect for my future. I remember my brother at that time asked my dad, "What's left for Nick now?" And my dad defended me because, that's what your parents should do. It's not what all parents do, but it's what your parents should do. But quite honestly, I think we all asked ourselves the same question, what's left for Nick now? Because it was something that we had never had to think about, never had to face. So when I went to third grade, I was lucky in the teachers that I had. I had a teacher who was a disability activist lawyer, and she fought for kids' rights. And I think she recognized in me a lot of potential that she fought to bring out. She fought to bring out the potential in all the students. But in the class that I was placed in, I was the only student without a cognitive disability. Now, for a third grader, this was frightening. Keep in mind, I had never met another blind person before in my life. I had suddenly went blind, and now I was placed in this classroom where I was surrounded by blind students who had varying and severe disabilities. And I looked at them and thought, is this what the world sees in me now? And it was truly frightening. I monitored my every movement. I was constantly worried for when I would start to behave differently from everyone else. Because my classmates, honestly, they hadn't had the same upbringing I had had. They didn't have the same capacities I had. And they behaved differently. And that's normal and that's natural. But to try to tell that an 8-year-old that that's normal and natural, it doesn't work. So my third grade teacher really encouraged me to be independent because she knew that in my life, that's where my success would come. She knew what people expected from a visually impaired person, which is to say very little oftentimes. But she always drove me to be very independent, to break the rules, to have a sense of humor, to run in the hallways. These were all things that she always encouraged me to do. And for an 8th grader, the biggest independence comes on the playground, playing alone on the playground, meeting other students. That's freedom. And there was one piece of playground equipment I loved. It was this metal rocket ship made out of these concentric rings that would get narrower as you climbed. I loved to climb. When I climbed, I left my cane on the ground. I pulled myself off the ground, and I was free. And I could feel the sun on my face again, and I could feel the wind, and it was wonderful. It was one day when I was playing on this, probably in the fall of my 3rd grade, that a voice called up from below. And the voice said, "Hun, you have to get down from there." And I knew in that way that you always know when the voice of reason is attacking you, that she was talking to me. So I asked her, why? Why do I have to get down? Other kids are playing. She said, yes, but you're not like all the other kids. She said, I would hate for you to fall and break your pretty white teeth. So I got off the playground. I got off the rocket ship. What else are you going to do when you're an 8-year-old and the playground attendant is telling you that you can't play in the playground equipment? So I went inside, and my teacher, Mrs. Claysmith, could see that something was bothering me. And she asked me what was wrong, and I told her what had happened. And Mrs. Claysmith said, Nick, you never let anyone tell you were different because you were blind. You have just as much right to play on the monkey bars as anyone else. And 20-some years later, I'm not going to put specific numbers on those, I still remember that same phrase. I still remember my teacher saying, never let anyone tell you were different. This, I think, has been some of the driving force in my life. I'm not the sort of person who does things because I'm encouraged. I'm the sort of person who does things because I'm discouraged. If you tell me I can't do something, I will do it. And that has been the way I've always been raised. I think it's very important. When you have a disability, you have to find strength in that disability. But what I want to talk about specifically is why I'm here. Why did I get here? So growing up through high school, fairly successful. I went on to go to school at the University of Michigan. I had my first opportunity to travel abroad, which was to Santiago, Chile, where I did a semester at the Universidad Pontificia Católica, so the PUC. And it was shocking. It was difficult. I was used to an environment like in the United States where we have a lot of technology. Any book I ever needed, it was scanned, it was given to me on a CD, or it was emailed to me, it was put on a resource online. I had amazing access. When I moved to Chile, there was none of this access. There was one service that offered to scan books for blind students. It was one service for the entire, I would imagine, for the city, because it wasn't specifically for the university. And I remember going there to ask them if they could scan a book. And of course they agreed to it, but it would take some time. So I said, okay, well, if it's going to take time, would you mind starting maybe with chapter 3 or chapter 4 so that, at least when it's done, I'll be at the same point as the other students, and then I can always go back and read the first chapters. And this man turned to a friend of mine and said, those blind people, they're so demanding. And I thought, oh, really? Okay, sure, whatever. But as I've grown and as I've gotten older, a lot of people have encouraged me to work with people with disabilities because I've been very successful, and a lot of my success has come from self-advocacy and just being really stubborn. But I've never wanted to. That was the thing. That was what was really strange, is I never had a desire to work with students with disabilities or to work with other blind people because I just felt like I kept getting pushed towards that direction, and I thought, you know, maybe that's not for me. Maybe that's not what I want to do. And then one day I moved to Japan. And in Japan, I really got to see what segregation meant, and I really got to see what discrimination meant. And in Japan, I was told that my contracting organization, which was the City Board of Education, they had the lease to my apartment, which was typical. And when I got to my apartment the first day, they said, this is the living room, this is the kitchen, this is the bathroom, these are some buttons, don't touch these. In the kitchen, they said, this is the fridge, this is the sink. Oh, I'm sorry, you don't have a stove. We decided that it's too dangerous. You can't have one. I said, can't have a stove? And they said, no, it's very dangerous. We'd hate for you to burn the house down. So the woman left my apartment, gave me strict instructions to please not leave my apartment alone. And there I was in Japan. Those buttons in the bathroom I wasn't supposed to touch were the hot water heater buttons, which in August was fine because it was warm outside, but come November, it was cold. And I didn't know how to adjust the hot water heater. So I was unable to boil a cup of green tea on the stove because I had no stove, and I was unable to make a cup of hot water in the bathtub because I didn't know how to use the buttons. So this went on for several months of not being able to leave my apartment alone, being told that, oh, you know, we don't know what you'll do at school, but you know, maybe we'll just put you in a classroom and have the kids come to you because there's stairs in the school, and we don't know if you can get up the stairs. Yes, I can get up the stairs. You know, don't walk to school. The school is 4 blocks away down one straight street, but it's very dangerous. You'll get hit by a car. You know, this whole game went on for about 3-4 months before one day I just snapped and said, you know what, I'm not going to live in a prison in Japan. I'm not seeing anything of the culture. I'm not even able to interact with my students. So at a city board of education, at a state convention on teaching English, they bring English teachers from around what they call the prefecture, which is the equivalent of the state. And in the introduction to this seminar, they said, and what amazing opportunities we have here with English teachers from around the world, and including one blind English teacher, and what a great opportunity it is for these students to see that you can do anything that you put your mind to. And I said, wait a minute. I can do anything I put my mind to, and that you tell me I can do, and that you permit me to do. So I went home that night and I wrote an email to the director of the Board of Education and said, look, unless you give me rights, unless you let me live my life, I'm quitting. And in Japan, that's a bit of a deal. When they make a statement to a state seminar saying we have this blind teacher, how great is this, and he quits, that looks really bad. So I had him where I wanted him. And they gave me rights. After that point, they broke down and said, okay, fine, just don't get killed, and you can leave your apartment. But after about 1.5 years or so, they finally asked me, would you mind volunteering at a school for the blind? Now keep in mind, as I've said, this was something I didn't have a lot of desire to do because I kept feeling a lot of pressure to work with kids with disabilities. But at this point, I wanted to show them that I could do this, and I wanted to do this well. Spent a lot of time preparing for it, made up a lot of activities to do with the students, and when I got to this school, I was entering into classrooms where there were children mixed between the ages of 4 and 10, some with 2 4-year-olds in a class, pretty young, a couple 10-year-olds with cognitive impairments, and one 8-year-old boy who was completely normal. Just an 8-year-old boy. He couldn't see, but apart from that, what was he doing in this classroom? He had nobody to talk to. He had nobody his own age. He had no one his own ability level. And he was segregated from the rest of society. And that really changed my perspective on life. I think I had to come to a point where I saw my own reason for wanting to work with kids with disabilities. Until I saw in that 8-year-old until I saw in that 8-year-old the life that I could have had I been born in a different situation. Until that point, I didn't have the desire. And then I realized a little bit in other countries outside of the US where I had a wonderful upbringing, not everyone has this opportunity, not everyone has this upbringing. So that really changed my whole mindset and inspired me to come back to the United States to apply to Harvard and to really focus on international education and on education for children with disabilities, inclusive education, and so forth, universal design. So that was the story, more or less, that brought me to be here. That's all.
Bill, would you like to add your story? What drives you? Disability and all that stuff.
Well, I kind of grew into disability, fighting it. When I was 12, doctors told me I had RP, retinitis pigmentosa, and that I was going to lose my vision when I was in my 60s, but it wasn't going to bother me. So I was driving a car, playing football, and reading anything I wanted to. When I was 20, I went 6 months to Peru and did earthquake relief in an area way in the mountains, up to 10, 11,000 feet. Not one house was standing, and we had to carry things up on our backs, 50, 100-pound bags of stuff, up to medicine, food, and coming down the mountains. I had problems with night vision if there weren't lights, but I'd never been in a place where there wasn't any light or no moon. This place, no electricity. We're coming down mountain cliffs. I couldn't fake it. And so I said, yo no puedo ver. And I remember these two guys, I didn't know what I was going to do. One of them grabbed one arm, one grabbed another arm, said, well, just follow me. And I often said, is it that easy to go up to strangers and say, I can't see? And it doesn't always happen that way. So I buried that, started teaching as a sighted person, and after my first year of teaching, my mother said, oh, you got to go to this new place in Boston, has a new kind of ERG test, and they can help you figure out what you got. So I went all-day visit, and I remember Rodrigo just making a comment not long ago about doctors shouldn't be telling people what to do with education. So at the end of the day, the doctor invited me into his chamber, asked me what I was doing. I told him he was a teacher, and this is the first thing he said to me, you got to get out of education. Oh, right, all right. So the doctor told me I can't teach. He didn't care where I'd gone to school, whether I had a certificate, what my characteristics were, whether I was competent, no questions, just you're going to lose your vision, you got to get out of education. I buried that information, I hid it, although I did anguish over it, and I started having problems in crowded areas like Filene's basement, any of you remember those, bumping into people, and dark things and light and showing videos, and sometimes with small print or print written that we on the old mimeograph machine or light pencil. So I went and talked with the deputy superintendent, Superintendent Johnson. Are you still here? No. But then, so this person said, and now I had been teaching 7, 8 years, multiple certification, master's degree, coach of track. And guess what this fellow said to me? You qualify for disability retirement, which I did, 7 years. So for me, it was a fight, and I was angry that I was losing my vision, but I was angry at that doctor and that deputy super, and like Nick, I was pissed off, and I think people with disabilities, I have found you either get ticked off and you're going to do something about it, or you get depressed and you stay at home and you wither away. And it can go either way, and I think, I was blessed. Family, faith, fellowship, laws like Section 504, and groups like the National Federation of the Blind, American Council of the Blind, really meeting other people with vision. It was actually at a disabled student center in UMass Boston that I joined a self-help group. I admitted for other people with vision impairments, and I learned that people with who are blind, vision impaired are in all walks, or I also say roles, for those who use wheelchairs, of life, involved in all kinds of activities. So I'm not going to say it was an easy process, and then in my 40s, I couldn't read print, in 50s, I couldn't see faces, and now all I see the light. Isn't it wonderful to see the light? But implications for schools. First, to say how these stereotypes that many professionals have and still have change in inclusive education. And this is why inclusive education is so critical for everyone. I remember I was studying Braille after school, and somebody from the Commission for the Blind was coming to my school, and it was a young man with a white cane coming in to work with me. And there were some kids by the front door while this fellow was coming in. So they see another blind guy coming in with a cane. Now, notice what my highly educated retina specialist and deputy superintendent advice, what they thought of somebody going blind. Here, my 9-year-old students, what question did they ask him? "Sir, in what school are you the principal?" Right? They had the stereotype, if you're blind, you had to be a principal. Okay? So those stereotypes can change very quickly in inclusive schools. If kids are just part of the playing soccer and history and math and on the jungle gym, those expectations can change. But, and it continues to be ongoing. But I want to talk about implications for children with disabilities in inclusive schools. So I ultimately believe for all groups of kids, including the blind, that inclusive education is the best. In my mind, the only group that we can educationally justify some clustering are the deaf, and that can be changed in a community in which other students are learning sign, which we also saw, so that kids are not isolated who are deaf and use sign as a basic level of communication. There is no other, in my mind, educational reason for clustering kids by disability. Although for convenience sake and for quality, sometimes it's better than the other options because, again, they're not always good, high-quality, inclusive options for kids. And inclusion hasn't worked well for everybody, and particularly for some kids with significant emotional issues, but that might be 1 or 2% of the population, and not like we have in Boston and in poor areas around the country, 45% of the population is substantially separate. But the implications first of all, it is critical that kids with disabilities who are included meet, hear about, read about others who have something similar to them. So if they're a blind kid, they should be exposed to and meet and hear about other people. Everybody should, but particularly that blind kid, or cerebral palsy, or on the autism spectrum. And so we made an effort, both in terms of the books that we read in class, and when we were studying history and science and our athletes, we talked about, and this scientist, he was on the autism spectrum, and this person had a learning disability, and this person used a wheelchair, and this person, and I'll never forget, particularly for kids with learning disabilities who look and seem the most, quote unquote, typical, normal, the word Nick used, even though we're all different and there is no normality, and clearly with a disability we don't suffer from the scourge of normality. I feel for those of you who have to try and be normal all the time, whatever that is. But you're doing okay, Tom. You keep hanging with us up here and we'll save you. All right. So, and I remember being this young man who was a poet and singing some song, but I said, tell him about your struggles. And he talked about how he struggled reading words like constitution and decoding, and how that led him to feel as a failure and stupid when he was a young person and becoming a teenager, and even had an emotional breakdown. But how he came through that and struggled and had a play produced in Broadway and was involved in construction. And after that, the amount of kids that came up to me and in their classrooms and went back and said, I'm like LaDerrick. I'm like him. So we have to, we don't want anybody to feel isolated by race, by language background, and certainly by ability. When we include, kids are not going to be clustered as much. So we have to be extra special. And as there are associations in this country and their parent groups, connect them with the blind groups and the kids with cerebral palsy and the kids who have people who have polio, and read the literature and meet the meetings, and use places like Perkins for weekends and summer programs to meet other people who are blind, because we're going to get a different perspective than just when we're included. So exposing that was absolutely critical for doing that with kids with disabilities. And there was, and the other thing, and this gets back to the terminologies, the person who said, why don't we say special education? Because ultimately we have to teach the kids to be comfortable about who they are and naming who they are and coming out of the closet. So I wanted my kids who had print disabilities. See, sometimes, a kid with print disability, they couldn't read something, get frustrated, throw something down, get in trouble. So I'd sometimes see them in the office. We had accommodations. Were they universal? Did we have enough computers for everyone? No. So it didn't work perfectly. And all it takes is going around, read something around the room, and the kid with a learning print disability, kicks the table over, gets mad, whops somebody, because it was cooler for him to be bad than to feel stupid. And I'm using their words. So they're up in the office with me. They have to do their work. And they say, I can't do this. I know they're going to struggle reading. And I go, hey, I can't even see anything, Why don't you read the words you can? And when you get to words you can't read, spell it to me, and we'll see if we can figure it out. And that's ultimately the beauty of disability, is that people who survive with disability, and a lot of people don't, okay, they're at home with grandma or grandparents worrying about what's going to happen, or they're alone, or they're depressed, get very creative in figuring out how to do things, and that's ultimately what good education is about. That figuring it out, because we all have weaknesses, we all have growth areas, we all need to learn things. Let's figure out how we're going to do it. And then when you have people with disabilities, you figure that out more creatively, more flexibly. And then having kids feeling comfortable about saying, yeah, there's this thing called autism, and there's this kid, Max, in Parenthood, and there's this kid in this book, and there are other kids in the school, and this means for you, it's hard for you to walk into a large group, it's hard for you to do this, but you do this better, you do this better, you do this better. And hopefully, and we have social groups and empowerment groups, we want kids to talk about that in a positive way, because when they get to Harvard or other universities, they may not always have the Disabled Student Center, their mother, or their teacher aide there to explain what they need to do to advocate to be successful at the T, here, or at the Boys and Girls Club. So we want to try and develop a culture in our schools in which it's not only okay, it's cool. It's good to talk about, these are some things I do really well, and these are some things I need some help with because of whatever. And sometimes we don't know exactly what it is. I'll give one anecdote and then I'll finish, but people will enjoy this. I remember we had a kid very involved in the autism spectrum, also had Tourette's, mostly nonverbal, and down in our cafeteria we had some visitors coming around, and the visitors, we're going to class and they're the cafeteria, and so one of the visitors said, "How you doing, kids?" And this one kid, Alan, started going, "Fucking good, fucking good, fucking good, fucking good, fucking good." And he wasn't stopping because he had echolalia. The adults were there, what are we going to do? It was another one of his kids, a peer, who said, "Stop that, Alan, stop it." And Alan stopped right away. And then Alan turned to these visitors and the adults, and he had to explain that his friend, who's another 9-year-old, how a 9-year-old can explain that someone's on the, because they knew him as Alan. They go, when Alan gets like this, we just tell him to stop. We don't pay attention to him. He's got, what 9-year-old can say he's on the autism spectrum with significant Tourette's and da 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 da. He's got one of those swearing disabilities. That's that. Everybody was cool. No problem. Life goes on. By the way, that boy Alan in the inclusive program grows up, and he now is going to vending machines, supported work out in the world, and putting things. And the boy who told him stop that and moved the adults along to another place, he's a social working with kids in foster placements. Neither of that would have happened if they hadn't been in an inclusive school.
Thank you. Michael.
Chapter 3, the personal is political. So, senior in high school, very expensive, exclusive, scholarship-based school, and we're waiting for my guidance counselor to come to the house, because it's the year in which you apply to colleges. I've done the SATs, I've scored very well, and throughout my years, done well, and there's trepidation, because when it was time to come back to the school post-disablement, this was the only person on the school's governing committee who said, well, we've never had a disabled kid before, what are we going to do? We can't accommodate him. We don't know what to do with him. And of course, through a different story, he was overridden because my mother went to the chief benefactor of the school and told her exactly what was going on, and she picked up the phone, called up the principal and said, if he's not in school and given a scholarship, you're never getting another cent. So he's coming to the house, and he's supposed to be my guidance counselor. And he's made this special trip just to come to our house, not to do the regular guidance counselor thing in school, high school, but just come to our house. And he comes and he sits down with my parents and I, and he says, you know, kids like Michael are just not meant for college. If he has to go, let it be CUNY, City University, at the most. But, you know, spending the money on applications, spending the money on, you know, on tuition, that's really just a waste. And you have to understand the context of being a first-generation American, mother, Holocaust survivor, family, middle-class New York kid, not very affluent, etc. And probably one of the proudest moments was my parents standing up and escorting him to the door and telling him to leave and to never come back. And so you go. So, but it doesn't end there, because I applied to 9 private universities, plus Hunter, plus NYU.
Can you tell us the year?
Well, I graduated in 1981, so it's 1980.
Post Section 504.
Post 504. And the applications go out, and the guidance counselor's recommendation to each of these schools where he has a personal relationship with the admissions officer is that kids like Michael are not meant to go to college. He may have succeeded within this environment, but he's not going to succeed in that environment. We know this because later on my father, who is a lawyer, managed to get copies of all these letters. And so 9 private universities turn me down, despite the numbers. Hunter, of course, admits me and gives me a full scholarship. And at NYU, my rehabilitation counselor, because I went to NYU and was in the hospital there for many years, was working for the president, who was a fellow named John Bradamus. John Bradamus, if those of you don't know, was the sponsor, author of the Education for All Handicapped Children's Act, representative from Indiana. And Patty goes into his office and says, John, because she's working on a program which links some of the NYU schools, this is a good kid. Look at his numbers. This is a good kid. Let's give him a chance. And NYU admits me, although it was still on merit, I had all the numbers. And they gave me a small scholarship. And I wound up graduating first. So fast forward, and here's your Harvard story. It's time to decide where to go to law school. And I've applied to 6 law schools, admitted to all. It's come down to Harvard or Yale. And I drive up with my dad, and I'm meeting with not the dean, but the dean of students. Do you remember Molly Garrity? A long time ago, now passed. Anyway, I meet with Molly, and we sit with her, and she says, well, you know, you're admitted, you're very welcome to come. And there's one dorm that has a ramp onto the first floor. One. And we'll give you a room in it. But we're not going to do any changes to the room. There's a bathroom on the floor, but we're not going to make any changes to the bathroom. There's no kitchen on the floor. There's no laundry on the floor. There are no elevators linking your dorm into the tunnels. And if you cross through the snow and ice over into the next building, there is no elevator there either. Now there is. But you know, you're very welcome to come. We'd love to have you. And if it's not to your taste, and she used the 4-letter word that you never use in Cambridge, you can go to Yale. P.S. At the time, Yale, the dean is Tony Croman, lovely guy. They're getting all the students, law students with disabilities who have been turned off by Harvard. Kids who have been admitted who got the same spiel and went there, and they retrofitted dorms and changed all the classrooms, and even made the teaching classrooms, get ready for this, accessible to law professors who might have disabilities. Who would think? Whoever saw such a thing? Who would think, right? Who would think? So I come to Harvard. And for my 3 years, and this was the nasty years, 85 to 88, 540 of you and your closest friends in one room, with great letter grades and, very strict curves and knives and daggers and all that. Not a very friendly place. While my colleagues and students are going underground through this weather, through the snow and all that, I'm above ground through the snow, barefoot, backwards, uphill, and everything like that.
We at the Ed School stay above ground.
You do. You do. Not a very friendly place. I become the first person with a disability to be on the law review, and I break that barrier for volume 100. I was in volume 100 and 101. So 100 years, I broke the barrier. The late Paul Miller, who was several years ahead of me in law school and a friend, a little person who wound up being EEOC commissioner and many other things, calls me up and says, "Congratulations, you broke a 100-year barrier. I'm proud of you. Now, how the hell are you going to get up the stairs?" Because at that point, Gannett House, right? Second floor, not accessible. Third floor, not accessible. And so for my second year, which is the big year, I'm dragging myself up the stairs, climbing the stairs up to the second floor. By my third year, I say, you know what, enough of this. I'm tired of dragging myself up. I think I've had enough of this. And I'm thinking about, I've got it on my CV. This is enough. I don't know that I want to be there. And at the time, someone who was a visiting professor was the late Leon Higginbotham. Anyone know the name Leon Higginbotham? First African-American chief judge of a circuit court in the United States, African-American legal historian in the matter of race, a man whose voice made James Earl Jones sound squeaky. And I went to see the judge and I said, I'm tired of this. I've been dragging myself up and down. It's been a year. It's been really hard. There have been some very lovely people. For example, Peter Rubin, who's now on the Massachusetts Judicial Court, my classmate, always lovely to me. Right, others. I said, but for the most part, it's been very isolating, very whatever. I said, I'm thinking about not going back. He said, if you don't go back, how are they ever going to know what they're doing wrong and what they're missing? He said, go back there and tell them that the judge said, figure out a way to get you a room on the ground floor. And they did. They traded the Legal Aid Bureau. And so for my third year, I hid downstairs where no one could see me. Now, fast forward if you like, 20-something years, and I come back to teach. And I'm lucky enough to set up the Center on Disability. And I'm teaching disability law, and I'm telling my students this story. I'm teaching them ADA. I'm telling them the story, and all these kids, 22, 25, no offense to any of you, who grew up and were born after the ADA with an IDEA, saw disabled kids in their classes all their lives, etc. I tell them this story, and they sit there and they shake their heads, and they think, how can that be? That's impossible, right? That's impossible, and I think that's beautiful, right? I think it's just wonderful that they think it's inconceivable. And about 3 weeks ago, I did the first elevator ride in Gannett House. They took me on a tour. It's now completely accessible. So when we work in the developing world, and we've worked in about 40 countries, when I see a child with a disability or hear of a child with a disability where the parents have taken them to school and the principal has said, well, we can't accommodate her. It's not going to be fair to her. It's not going to be fair to the other students. Take her home, bring her back next year. Try the next district over. I'm always very, very, very clear about how lucky I am relative to these children. But that's the button that pushes it for me when I think, this child can go to school. This child can have friends. This child can be part of the community. This child can go on and seek employment. This child can go on and have a decent life. Or this child can go back and be shuttered at home and not see the outside world. And what are we going to do about it? Personal is political, chapter 3.
Rodrigo,
Yeah,
your personal story.
okay. Last year, I received an email from the World Economic Forum inviting me to give a speech about resilience. The speech would be part of their schedule. So there would be chief of states, companies, presidents, and other leaders discussing the future of the world. And I had some idea about what resilience is, but I decided to read and understand what is the basis of the concept. That, as you may know, resilience is a concept of physics that says that some materials, they have a property of returning back to their initial condition after being pressured or after being deformed. So what does this concept have to do with the human trajectory? Or what does resilience has to do with our behavior? I was born in São Paulo, and I was raised by a medium-class family, and my parents always consider education a priority, so I and my sister and my brother, we had a chance to go to a good school, and my favorite sport, my favorite activity actually, when I was a child was soccer. How do you know, Bill? So I loved to play soccer, and when I was 13 years old, I injured my knee. I had a lesion on my knee that took me off the fields for 3 years. I tried to solve that through therapy, through rehabilitation, but it didn't work. And I went to surgery. And after 3 months, my lesion was totally solved, and I could play soccer again. So I decided what my future would be. I decided to study medicine, and nothing appears to be more noble than being a doctor, able to give back quality to people. And I followed this dream until I was 18 years old. It was a Saturday. I was leaving home with my young brother, and 2 guys came wanting to take my car. And one of them, without saying nothing, just shot on my neck from behind. And the bullet crossed my neck, and the heat of the bullet caused a lesion on my spine. So this guy opened the door and just dropped me on the floor, and I noticed that I couldn't move. I saw that there was blood on my shoulder, and I realized what happened. I noticed that I probably would use a wheelchair, but I choose to remain alive because I felt that I haven't finished what I wanted to do. And I started a very, very delicate rehabilitation process that took me 4 years. I took 6 months to be able to sit, and during this period I spent like 8 hours per day doing physiotherapy. And at the beginning I did what I could to return being a person physically independently. And 2 years after my accident, I went to a rehabilitation center in Havana, in Cuba, which was very advanced in terms of surgeries and physiotherapy techniques. And there I could receive a very special service in terms of exercises and types of rehabilitation proposals. And after 3 months being there, I reached my limit. I realized that I did what I could to return to my initial condition, and then I should accept my new situation. And based on my new situation, I should do the better I could to find a new dream and new ways of reaching this dream. So I fly back to São Paulo, and I went to the business school where I did my undergrad and my master, and I started my career as a business consultant, as Jenny told you at the beginning of this meeting. And after 2 years, I decided to dedicate my time and my experience to the social sector. So I've been leading this institute for the last 14 years, and what we try to do is to change the mindset of the people who decide the future of education. But turning back to Davos, to this meeting of the World Economic Forum, when I went to the stage, there was an interviewer who asked me, Rodrigo, based on your story, how do you think that people can find energy to bouncing back? Yeah, to finding a way to recover the courage and the energy to move on. I answered that in the face of imposed change, I believe that human beings really tend to seek a returning to their initial condition. I felt that I spent like 4 years trying to return to what I was. And I believe this is a fundamental capacity that we should use to our will and to our principles. So when someone passes through a crisis or to some disruption, it is important to keep our principles and to maintain our will to live. But when we think about our actions, I prefer to use a concept that somehow is the opposite of resilience, which is the concept of plasticity. Plasticity is a property of some materials to change according to a new situation, to be mutable, to understand the opportunities of this new condition, and to completely transform the initial form. So in my case, when I was shot, I had to be resilient so that I move on and keep my will to be alive. But I also had to transform and change the paths I would follow to reach my dream. So I believe that it is more interesting to think about the combination of the resilience of our will to the plasticity of our action when we think about our human trajectory. So I answered to this interviewer that instead of bouncing back, I believe we all should look for bouncing forward. And that will be a better expression. Thank you.
I'm not going to attempt to be provocative, but I possibly be. Any folks have any questions you want to ask of any of the panelists or comments you want to make? Any at all?
Thank you so much for the panelists and for the powerful and beautiful stories. It reminds me of our work in China with disabled persons organizations and how resilience carried them through, and to show that disability, as Mr. Henderson said, is one part of the beauty of life. And it's like other challenges you have if you go through, and it needs empowerment, wisdom, and strength, and to keep your life going. And we work with this DPO to create a handbook for the rights of persons with vision impairments. And when I began to talk to them, they said, "Oh, no, it's impossible for us. We can't write this handbook. We're not capable of writing it." I said, "Well, you can, and we'll help you." So over the process of writing this handbook, they finished it, and it was beautiful. And on the cover, they said it was a dialogue and between persons with disabilities and the public. They put it this way. They said, "This is a gift from persons with disabilities to the public, to those who don't have disabilities. And let's work together to break down the walls and to review the beauty of life in spite of the disability." And from that common statement, I saw resilience and perseverance persons with disabilities have to go through because of the wrong attitude. And the whole society everywhere in the world missed out so much. And I think this is the most powerful moment of the conference, and thank you so much for whoever make this happen. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Allison.
Good afternoon. My name is Allison. I just have a question for each of you. Throughout your personal stories, you really spoke to maybe a personal advocate that helped you and championed you as you began to figure out what you wanted to do and pursue in life. Could you speak how we can build and really support those advocates in supporting you, and as you move forward and look at different situations in life, how do you build advocacy inside and outside of your family?
Any thoughts? Bill?
So I'm 30. I'm finally admitting my vision's going. I don't know whether I can stay teaching or not. And decide I have to start using a cane, which means I have to start admit to people that I might be going blind. And was this a major change for me? And I resisted it. So, hey, got to go for it. So my kids are young, and I have 3 kids. They're young. I go home, I sit down, I say, Meg, Tony, Joya, Daddy, has got an RP, and I might be going blind, and I might not be able to see. And they say to me, "What are you going to make us for supper?" Okay? Life goes on, And that was a kick in the pants, and wanting to do, and I also remember a really strong principal in Boston, Margarita Muñiz from the Hernandez, and now there's a high school named after her. And she came to this country from alone when she was 10, 11, from Cuba, and lived here without her parents for a while. A really very strong educator who developed a 2A bilingual school. And we moved into a building in Eggleston Square in Roxbury. This building could have been torn down, a very poor section of the city, because we were expanding. She had hired me as her assistant principal. My vision's getting worse. I can see somewhat in light, but where it was dark, I wasn't seeing anything, even with some lights. And you might come to Harvard to study to be an assistant principal, and they'll teach you all these courses, but 50% of what you're going to do is cafeteria duty, bus duty, and discipline. So I don't know if they teach that in any of the classes here, but I hope they add that to the curriculum. And, when I say cafeteria, we're talking, 2.5 hours of the day, getting kids in and out to recess, and I was responsible for organizing this. And this building was a dump that had the old light bulbs. It was deplorable condition in Roxbury, and I go down, I said, Margarita, I can't see my hands, how am I going to supervise 3 lunches, with staff and kids? And she said, don't worry, Bill, you'll figure something out. And I want to stress, we think it's the big, pronouncements and advice from people, who have degrees in disability studies or psychoanalysis or whatever. But it's sometimes those ordinary comments from children, from fellow colleagues and employees that can be that, kick in the butt. I'm not diminishing the importance of the advocacy and leadership of other blind people in this country. But in terms of moving forward, and that's why the more that I've been involved with inclusion, we talk about resources and technology and UDL, but it's the attitudes, it's the conversation, it's the relationships of people who are teacher aides, counselors, principals, bus drivers. That's what gives the encouragement and the enthusiasm to so many kids with disabilities, as well as these important laws and advocacy and judges and therapists. So both of those are important. So for me, it's really some of the simple, commonplace conversations.
Great. You want to add anything before?
Everyone can be an advocate for change and a human rights champion, and it would be lovely if it was disability rights, but it could be any type of inclusion. And that doesn't mean getting on a pulpit. It means just acting in a very decent way on a daily basis. So my writing and work is certainly civil rights friendly and human rights friendly, but here's a story. I was teaching down in Virginia, and we had the one and only incident against people who were gay, lesbian, bi. They tore down the signs at the law school and put up some nasty stuff on the wall. And the other professors got together and they said, okay, we're going to raise money, for a reward for anyone who puts information and da-da-da-da-da. And I said, well, I think I'm going to handle this differently. And they said, okay. And so for the next 3 weeks, while I'm teaching all the first-year students torts and being Socratic and giving them hypotheticals, pretty much every single hypothetical involves a same-sex couple or a transgender person. So treating the normal as the normal. I know who's normal, we're not. I'm certainly not. But treating the diversity as normal, reaching out to people and just including them, saying to someone who is not being included in a group, going and sitting down next to them and saying, hi, how are you? Just being good people and being inclusive is how you can change things.
Well, in my case, right after my accident, I went to the hospital, and so my family, my friends came to follow what would happen, and my father was out of town. He was working, and I was very worried about seeing my father because I didn't know if I would survive, and so I was waiting to him, and when he appeared, he was very wise for me because he just said, son, don't worry, do your part because we are going to do ours and everything is going to be okay. So that became my motto. Every day I wake up, remember that I should do my part. And in terms of advocacy, I believe that right after I left this initial phase and started going to rehabilitation centers, I noticed that I was a privileged person. Most of the people who passes through accidents like mine in Brazil, they even don't have money to buy medicine or to buy a wheelchair. So that makes me decide that I could do something. And I could turn all those help that I received during my rehabilitation process into a will to give back what I received and change this context of inequality. So that's my source of advocacy.
Nick, you want to have a final word today?
Okay. So I'm just going to, there's nothing I can add that hasn't already been said. I've had to be my own advocate. I've had wonderful people advocate for me. And I've gotten to teach kids with Asperger's and autism who have really changed my perspective on myself. So it's what everyone has said. But I think us as going forward, getting back to the question to promote the ideas of inclusion and how we advocate for others and ourselves, a lot of it comes down to the exposure that we have. So each one of us, disability or no, can still promote the idea of accepting others in our everyday actions. And as we go further from here on into the future, every day as things like inclusive schools, as policies for inclusion become more prevalent, we're affecting generations of new kids who are going to grow up with the idea that everyone learns together and that everyone's equal. So it's just it's a concept that can only exponentially grow.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Wonderful panel. Want to say some wind-up words here? Jenny's going to. Good. Here you go, Jenny.
Thank you once again, everyone, and thank you to all our participants. It's truly been an inspiring afternoon for me, and I hope it has been for you all as well. I hope that you'll join us for a reception afterwards, and I would just like to echo again that I hope that we all remember that anyone can be an advocate. As Michael Stein said, that was beautiful. Thank you very much.